Hi, everybody. It's David Rhodes with Fire Engineering Books with another episode of In the Books. I'm joined today by my good friend Dena Ali, who is a battalion chief with the Raleigh, North Carolina Fire Department. She has worked her way up through the ranks there. She also serves as a program manager of Behavioral Health for First Responders Center for Excellence. She holds a degree from North Carolina State University and an MPA from the University of North Carolina, Pembroke, where her research focused on firefighter suicide. She is an executive fire officer program graduate through the National Fire Academy and was awarded the North Carolina Office State Fire Marshal's Honor, Courage, and Valor Award for her steadfast efforts to bring awareness to firefighter mental health through her own vulnerability. Dena, welcome.
Thank you, Chief Rhodes. It's exciting to be here with you.
Are you glad to have this project complete?
You know I am. It was
It's been a struggle in itself, right?
it's been an undertaking, but it is
But
exciting
a labor of love for sure.
completely.
So the book is called Hope Out of Darkness, and it has been out for a few weeks now, and um, getting a lot of good reviews, and it's creating a lot of good conversation. Let's get started with why the title Hope Out of Darkness.
Well, interestingly, I had a different title, but it turned out there were a lot of books with the title that I had. It was Finding Light Within the Darkness. And I chose that title because I'd actually read a book a few years ago written by a West Point grad called The Beauty of a Darker Soul. And in that book, it just really, everything about that book just spoke to me. He had struggled after deploying. His highest rank non-commissioned officer was killed in combat. He was shot, and he ended up going back and serving. And afterwards, he became the poster boy of resilience and post-traumatic growth. But he explained that the whole time on the inside, he was just struggling, and it was not with what people thought it was. He said he joined the military to be in combat, so being shot didn't impact him. It was a lot of other stuff that he wasn't able to speak about that did. And at the end of the book, it closed with "Welcome to the Darker Souls Club." If you've been down a similar path, you are a part of this club, and members of this club have a unique ability to help others. So I really like the idea of finding light within the darkness. But because there were so many books with that title, I switched to Hope Out of Darkness. But I love that title as well because a lot of people, and Brene Brown actually was the first person that explained that hope isn't just some fuzzy, warm feeling or something that some people have and others don't. It's actually a cognitive process, and hope truly is the antidote to a lot of struggle. And in fact, like she said, hope's the antidote to suicide because hope requires a trilogy. You've got to be able to set realistic goals. You have to know a path to achieve those goals, and you have to have belief in yourself. And real interestingly, a lot of people don't realize this. Um, Chief Zalka actually recommended the book Deep Survival. Have you read that?
Mm-hmm.
And what I thought was really fascinating is in Deep Survival, they talk about the people who survived tragedy, survived major events, were ones that had hope and were able to set
Right.
small goals and achieve those goals. And all of the things that can help you, you know, survive some sort of tragedy are all the same things that can help you survive mental health struggles. Those small goals and having belief and being persistent and just putting one foot in front of the other.
Yep. I remember the stories. What was the guy that was shipwrecked in Antarctica, and the whole crew is down there, and one of the things was a guy would pull out a guitar, and they would just play songs every night. I mean, starving and desperate, and some of them ended up, surviving, but it would gave them something other than just sitting there in the doom and gloom. So that was
Exactly.
pretty cool. I actually uh, looking up the definition of hope, and one of the definitions, explanation as a verb, was like to expect with confidence, a desire accompanied by the expectation of fulfillment. So, I mean, it is a great title to use the word hope because it is sort of the foundation of making it work, right? And then if we just look at hope like a feeling, or darkness on the surface, but darkness is actually the place, the loneliness, right? Is that the way it was was meant for the title?
Oh, absolutely, and a lot of times when we're struggling, we're overcome by the darkness, and that's all we see, and, on the cover, the top right corner, there's just a little bit of light, and that's all you need to have hope is you just have to see that little bit of light, and to know that you can achieve that, and you can take those small steps to get there.
So, what got you started on this path? Obviously, you were a police officer for a while, and then you came to the fire department after you, what'd you say? You hit your head and became smart, and then
Exactly.
came to the fire department. But what put you on this path? Because this is not a normal path for a firefighter or fire officer to go down in research.
Oh, absolutely, and, man, there's so much luck involved in the people that I've met and the opportunities I've been given. I remember, actually Rick Lasky had come to Raleigh in, spring of 2014, and I remember him telling me about this thing called FDIC and how I have to go, and then that fall, there was, in the fire engineering magazine, there was a you can win a scholarship to FDIC. You have to be nominated, so I called my friend and asked him to nominate me. So he nominated me and I won. So I got to go to FDIC in 2015 with the FDIC scholarship. And that's where I met Bobby Halton. And I remember when we met through just some of the conversations, I could tell that mental health and suicide were important to him. I didn't realize everything with his son until later, but I knew there was a soft spot he had. But at the time, it really, it wasn't that big to me. However, that time in that fall, it turned out to be, like, a really terrible time for me. That fall, I went through a depression, I was having thoughts of suicide. I was really struggling, but it was 2015, it wasn't things we were talking about in the fire service, and, I knew if I admitted to anybody that I was having thoughts of suicide, that I would be deemed unfit for duty, made fun of, all the other stuff that we fear. Um, Ironically, around that same time, I had a school projects I had signed up for graduate school, and it was action research. Find an area where current practices are not best practices, research and help develop better practices. So I reached out to our safety chief, Chief Frankie Hobson, and asked him if he could recommend a topic. I thought it was going to be something like, you know, RIT operations, smoothbore versus fog. I thought it was going to be something tactical and cool. But he came back and he asked me to look into firefighter suicide. And of course, my instinct was like, "Holy shit, what does he know? Like, how does he know?" But like every great student, I went to Google and I typed in firefighter suicide. And again, back to luck, the first three things that pinged were actually three articles that I still reference today. One was a fire engineering article. One was a dissertation by Dr. Savia. I can't remember what the other one was, but I I got to reading them, and all of a sudden I felt it helped me because up until that point, the things that were bothering me, to me, were very insignificant and silly, so I didn't have the right to talk about them, but as I was researching, that was a commonality. For a lot of first responders, we feel that our struggles are insignificant compared to all the struggles everybody else is facing, so we silence, which ends up making it worse. So I got involved in the research, and I just thoroughly enjoyed it because it became me search, and it helped me. So when I got done, I sent the paper to Chief Hobson, and he was like, "Hey, this is really good. Can you make it into a class for us to deliver for Safety Stand Down Month?" And I was like, "Sure, but you're going to deliver it, not me," because again, it's a taboo topic. I'm still pretty new within our fire department. I didn't want to be that person, so I created a PowerPoint, sent it to him, and about a week before, he said, "Hey, are you ready for next month?" And I was like, "Oh, no, that's you." He's like, "No, I can't do it without you." So we delivered it and, to every member of our department, over the course of 30 days, we did multiple classes, and, the first day, during one point in the class, he stood up and he's like, "Hey, do you mind if I interrupt?" And of course, I'm like, "Absolutely, go ahead." And, it was the image that Paul Combs had of the firefighter drowning in the ocean with all these sharks swimming around him, and Chief Hobson goes, "That's me." That guy's me. And he told his story. And later he told me that he asked me to do this research because he himself had, gotten to a point of struggle and he did everything right. He reached out to EAP, hit, press one now, press two now. And then it ended up as a voicemail. And he remembered in that moment, he was already feeling like shit. when he got to a voicemail when he reached out, he felt even more like a failure, and he later told me that, he knew he wasn't in the right place to help others, but he knew how important it was to help others. So that just kind of started me down that path, and realizing that my research wasn't only helping me, but also others, was just super empowering. I remember I sent my paper to Bobby Halton because I knew that he had this interest in it, and I didn't expect or realize, but he said, "Hey, man, this is great. I'm publishing it in fire engineering." I was like,
Hmm.
"Goodness."
And that was 2015, 2016.
I think that paper got published December of 2016.
Okay. And now, did you meet Bobby because you were the scholarship winner?
Yes.
Okay. So it wasn't you just happened to walk up to him because you were there. It was a planned meeting. Sometimes those meetings by design are where they say um, uh, anonymous or chance is God's way of remaining anonymous.
It really was, because I say that a lot. I know, we work hard to get what we achieve, but it's amazing how things end up in front of you, and luck, because there is a lot of luck involved. Um, Luck that, I remember hearing Rick Lasky mention FDIC. I saw it in the magazine. I got selected, and then I got to meet Bobby, and I just remembered hearing him. I think he just went off on a tangent, and he was talking about mental health and how important it was, and it was such a unique conversation at the time that it stuck with me.
Hmm. That's awesome. So I know from my conversations with you before, one of your big things is dispelling myths, and even some content and stuff we've had you review before we publish. And there's so many myths out there and misconceptions. What are some of the main ones that you wanted to dispel in the book?
Yeah, and I had that was probably one of my favorite chapters to write. I had a lot of fun, jumping around. Um, of course, the first one is the one that you hit on at your keynote in 2023, is that, PTSD is not the main contributor to firefighter suicide. And it was I enjoyed having that conversation and just being able to dive deep into it, because a lot of people have this assumption that you see one bad thing, or you go on one bad call, or you run up several bad calls, and instantaneously in a vacuum, seeing bad things causes PTSD. But there's so much more to it, and that's why two different people can respond differently to similar,
Hmm.
stresses. The community you belong to, if you're a part of a really supportive network, if you're a part of a really supportive company with good leadership, you're going to be able to withstand more stress than somebody who's not. If you're an outcast, female or minority in the fire service, and you're not, you know, a part of the family, you don't, get pulled into the jokes, or the team building bonding exercises, you are more likely to end up with some sort of PTSD. But what was really fascinating in looking at the research beyond the fire service, but also, like within the military, is they found there was zero relationship between combat and suicide. And in fact, they found more people who served died by suicide that were never deployed. So to me, it was important to talk about, okay, what are these other factors? Because I think if we continue to only focus on the calls, and we don't talk about these other factors, we're never ever going to make a difference, and we're never ever going to reduce rates of, PTSD, and eventually suicide, if we continue to attribute it to something that maybe isn't the true cause. And then something that I get asked a lot, and we talk about a lot, is people want to know rates of suicide for firefighters. What's the rate? Has it gone up? What's the numbers? What's the numbers? And it's so difficult to provide true accurate rates, of suicide for first responders. And so one of the myths that I explained and talked about, is basically the association between being a firefighter, and suicide doesn't truly exist, because there's more factors. When looking at suicide rates, it's easy to look at the rates, among firefighters, and see that maybe they're 25 per 100,000. Chief DeGrice actually did a study in Chicago, and he found that the rates were higher, 25 per 100,000, compared to, at the time, it was 11 per 100,000 for, civilians. However, he realized that his data wasn't good because it did not control for gender or demographic. And we know that white men have substantially higher rates of suicide than other demographics. And in fact, Black women, their suicide rate is extremely low. It's around 3 per 100,000. So understanding demographics and the key that they play into data is super
Mhm.
important. And I remember Chief DeGrice says, you know, like figures lie and numbers lie or something like that. Like you could take
Mhm.
data and make it say whatever you want.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. People do it every day.
Yes. Yes.
Mhm.
So, it's for me, it's fun to be able to write in a book or in an article and just kind of dispel all of that and put it out there. And I usually get really good feedback, but if you try to have those conversations or even try to have them on social media, it's
Oh,
very difficult, right?
right.
But it's amazing how you can put them down in a book, cite your information, and get people to say, "Ah, I see that. Okay."
Aha,
Yeah.
as Eddie Murphy said in Coming to America. Ha ha. Or no. Yeah, that was it. Ha ha.
Yeah.
Um, so you have a quote in the book attributed to Archbishop Desmond Tutu, who ironically I actually had a chance to meet in 1996. He was attending the Olympics in Atlanta. And by chance, I went into this little place to grab a sandwich. And he was sitting at a table by himself in a packed restaurant. I didn't know who he was until I sat down and I said, "You mind if I sit down?" And he goes, "Absolutely." And I sat down and there he was right in front of me eating the sandwich. So we talked about the Olympics mostly, but a phenomenal person in our history here. So his quote is, "There comes a point where we need to stop pulling people out of the river. We need to go upstream and find out why they're falling in." Um, just 100% supports what we were talking about. But why do you think that? Why is it that we're afraid of the root cause in an organization? Is it because of the leadership component is such a big piece of it, or is it just ignorance?
I don't know that we're afraid of the root cause. I just think that we put all of our resources into reaction, that we have little left for the root cause. I think if we had more resources, people would be willing to look at the root cause. But we're so focused right now on, you know, all these crisis resources, making sure we have strong peer support teams and chaplaincies, making sure that departments have psychologists, which is helpful. And I know, you can talk to some people and you can say that that goes upstream as well. Um, Facility dogs, you're seeing dogs everywhere. Everybody's getting their canines for crisis response. And we're doing, amazing work after the call to have resources in place. But something that I've seen over, uh, almost 10 years now involved in this is it seems like people who are struggling with life, it's almost as if when a bad call comes in, they have permission now to express themselves and express what they're feeling. And a lot of times, I don't call them out, of course, but a lot of times I'm like, that call had nothing to do with how you're feeling right now. That call was just the scapegoat to get you to, you know, blame your relationship or your increased use of substances on. And it's really frustrating when you realize that by going upstream, we truly can increase our capacity to withstand more stress, our capacity to move forward. And, I love now understanding a little more about heart rate variability because I think first responders, that's another issue or another difficulty is everybody wants to see the data. They want to see the evidence of what's working. So measuring resiliency is hard, and so measuring what increases resiliency is hard, but now we actually know that heart rate variability, which athletes have used forever to measure their capacity, is also a biomarker that can measure resiliency. And all the same things that people do for athletes to increase heart rate variability, those same things can increase our emotional resiliency.
Mhm.
So I would love to see us be able to, devote more resources into increasing our capacity. I know James Gearing just said on a panel last week about schedules and sleep, and that's a big area. It's so fascinating to find just from there's not been a lot of research studies, but just from a few that if you can improve sleep, you can save so much money downstream on disability, injuries, and whatnot. But we're kind of ignoring that aspect of it.
Mhm. Well, it's inconvenient because it costs money.
Yes, yeah. Getting a 4th shift. cost far more money, but it was actually, so fascinating. I think, Dr. Laura Barger did a research study, and she demonstrated in the long run just how much money you would end up saving by hiring
Right.
that 4th shift.
Yeah. I worked 24/72 when I first got in the fire service. And obviously, as an 18, 19-year-old, I hated it because I wanted to be there every day.
Yeah,
But that was a 42-hour work week, which is a pretty normal work week. And obviously worked 24/48 the majority of the time I was in the fire service. But I know a lot of folks are going to this 48/96. Is that the one that a lot of people are working? And I don't know what's best, but obviously some of those shifts would not work in some places. So it kind of depends on your call volume and that type of deal. But like, some of the stations where we were, you would be on 50 plus calls at the end of a 48-hour tour, and then it would take you
yeah.
96 hours to recover. I worked 4 days straight at my first department, and we ran 5 calls a day maybe. And I was probably 20 years old. And when I left that place, I was like, I am never freaking doing that again. And it wasn't the overload of calls, it was the walls closing in on you for
Yeah,
being in that place, and just like knowing, I guess you're always waiting on a call, so you're anxious for it. But I was like, never again. And of course, I was like the dog, it was overtime. I wanted to eat all the food I could get, right? But there's a lot that can be studied on the shift work and sleep. And how are we doing nationally with research and money in those areas? Is that something that's slowly starting to get a little bit of support, or are we still struggling?
no, I think that is something that is slowly starting to get a little bit of support. I know Joe Billings with the IAFC, they're actually working on Fire Z's report right now, and they're working with
Mhm,
a lot of researchers to kind of find out where we are, what we need, and to get out recommendations. So I'm excited to see that. And that's something else a lot of people, I'm glad you asked. A lot of people don't realize why mental health has trailed behind a lot of other issues. It wasn't until around 2003, 2005 that research money was put into understanding suicide and other sort of mental health disorders. So I think I read something once, and it was like 90 times more funding was going through like pollution than
mhm.
suicide and mental health. So
And you're talking overall, not just fire service, right? You're
right,
talking
overall,
healthcare. Yeah.
there's been I haven't found a lot of research specific to the fire service that doesn't have significant limitation to it.
Mhm,
Most of the research specific to the fire service is, very limited in either having a low sample size or it's a convenient sample. So, of course, if you, put out something that says, fill out this survey about firefighter PTSD or firefighter suicide, the majority of people that are going to respond to it are people that have a vested interest in the topic. So it could make the numbers look higher than they really are. But we just know historically, overall, nationally, suicide, mental health, PTSD has just truly trailed behind all other leading causes of death. And even though now today, I mean, suicide truly is a public health crisis. Like the rates of suicide in the United States are up 37% since 2000. So it's at the point where we have to admit that maybe what we're doing is not working, or don't put all of our eggs in the basket of the latest research. Something that dawned on me recently was just how often better practices change, right? Like we used to do CPR 30 and 2, 15 and 2, and now we know
mhm,
constant compressions are so important. We used to, I remember when I was new on the job, somebody would go in and bust out every window because we didn't think about flow paths. Um, so
mhm.
there's a lot of stuff that everybody's saying, "You gotta do this, you gotta do this," and then 5 years later, we realize that was silly. And so
Right.
we're kind of at that point with mental health because it is such a young, area of research, and I think for me, that's the part of this book that I'm, like, the most proud of is being able to share what absolutely we know we work and sometimes or absolutely works, and sometimes those things are not the most popular, but they're important.
And even if the fire department is not the cause, of the suicide, I mean, I say it all the time, we're in the people business, and why not be a leg of the solution to somebody who is having issues? Because sometimes we know because of a bad family situation, because of whatever, the fire department may be the only hope in the structure that's there. So even if the stats say that it's not the calls, it's not this, it's not that, shoring up the department to be the supporting agency for your life in general, making you a better person, having friends, having purpose is a huge part of. I mean, there's no pill that can replace that.
Absolutely, and that's something I talk about a lot is, you know, we tend to talk about PTSD and suicide and just blame the job, firefighters are victims of this job, but what we fail often to talk about is all of the positive that comes with this job. Most of us make a pretty decent salary. We have purpose from, this career path. We have community. We have I mean, no matter what, there's generally a community in the fire service for everybody. And we've got insurance. So we have all of these protective factors that a lot of people in the general public do not have. Yet we don't highlight that. We always fall on the
The
bad, the
bad.
damage. And I know it's a human thing to have that proclivity to the negative instead
Yeah.
of positive. Um,
Somebody, I think Brian Brush said something the other day about like, no wonder we can't get people to come to the fire department anymore because all we're telling them is they're going to die by cancer, suicide, or get exposed to who knows what, and it's horrible. And it's like, well, somehow we're making it. I
yeah,
mean, those are all things we have to address, but it's not the majority of us. So you structured the book into 3 parts. Let's talk about those, and we'll get into a little bit of each. The first part is kind of an overview of mental health, suicide, and trauma.
Yeah, I wanted to just set the stage for understanding what those things are and, beyond just a superficial conversation. So the commonality of mental health, uh, especially where we are with suicide and understanding suicide today. And then, of course, trauma. A lot of people don't realize, and I know this is a big word, but it's my favorite word to use with it, the ubiquitous nature of trauma.
Mm,
Trauma is everywhere. We're all exposed to trauma. It's not just the calls. Sometimes it's loss in life, and that loss can be, your pet, it can be health, it could be, family member, but trauma is so common and ever present in life. And then, talked a lot about perfectionism because I think that is a key. They found a just a strong relationship between perfectionism and suicide. And I think as first responders, perfectionism continues to just be ever present where it's really hard for any of us to admit that we're imperfect or we make mistakes. When I was a police officer, there was a saying that some people were meant to be the police and some people were meant to call the police. And there was like a line, an invisible line, and you knew to always be on one side of that line. And I think
mm,
it's just very similar with the rest of the first responder community that we feel like we always have to be on the side of the line that's the responder, the hero, the protector, and we never allow ourselves to step over the line. But when you think about our careers, 30 years for a lot of us, life is going to happen. At some point over the course of your career, you're not going to be the protector, and that's okay because it's life. So the first part of it was just it set the stage. There's a section in there on bullying, which I think is important. It's something that we don't ever talk about, but when you look at it and you look at the data, the general population, the rate of harassment and bullying is about 10%. For first responders, it's about 40%. It's really high, specifically for women and minorities, but it's not something that we ever talk about. So I actually enjoyed writing that chapter. It was a little difficult, but I enjoyed it because it's important to start having those conversations.
right, and that's one that I think the awareness of the self awareness of how you know if you're actually participating, because lot of lot of folks look at it as fun and just part of the growing up in the fire service part, and there is some truth to some of that, but it can definitely go too far, and not everybody's the same. That's the other piece is that um, you may respond to something different. So you kind of have to size up everybody and know what buttons to push and which ones not on a lot of folks. Saves yourself a lot of paperwork and grief. What are we doing wrong?
Oh, that's a big question. Uh, I think well, and you nailed it again with your keynote, um, just solely focusing on the calls. So, of course, and I hate saying, "What are we doing wrong?" Like we mentioned earlier, we really do need to focus on moving upstream, but I mean, let's look at nutrition in emergency services. We know the value of exercise, eating well, yet despite what we know and know about how cardiac, disease is one of the number one things impacting us, you go into any firehouse and they're still cooking amazing fatty meals, at workout time, people still have their feet up. So, I know that mental health is even harder because it's not right there in front of your face. You gain a little weight, it's right in front of your face. You change habits. Mental health, it's invisible. So I know that just by saying, "Hey, let's get this awareness and move upstream," it's not going to make as big of a difference as I'd love for it to make. But I do think we have to quit putting all of our efforts and resources into crisis.
Right.
And
Which is your response teams after a call. And it's, I'll always looked at that like if you have a big incident at a plant or a factory and they have resources, like they have their own firefighters, their own hazmat team and all. If you've never met those folks, you don't use them.
right,
You're like, we're here now, stand over there, stay out of the way. If you've pre-planned, if you've built a relationship with them, then you use them as a resource. Same for the crisis intervention teams, the post incident teams, the the psychologists that are on staff or on call. If the first time you ever meet that person is after an incident, it's like we would always be like, we'd rather just talk amongst ourselves, you know. So I would see that as probably a place where people are still missing the boat is they're only responding after an incident and not like integrating those folks all the way up into the recruit school. Um, like let's start to get to know them, have some intervention on the very front end. Hey, this is what's gonna happen. These are some possibilities, and start building that relationship uh, ahead of time.
no, completely. And something though that I'm starting to see now as well that we're definitely doing wrong is we have just about every department now has a peer support team. You're seeing a lot of clinicians pop up for departments. So what I'm seeing happen is company officers, when a member comes in who's having a bad day or going through a divorce, they immediately are like, "Okay, this isn't my specialty. I'm going to refer you. Call peer support." And one of the things I say a lot now is I would love for us to put peer support out of business because when you look at the base of what peer support is, it is
It's
peers
peer,
supporting. We
right?
don't need specialized teams to take care of each other. We need to all be peers. We need to all care about each other. If somebody comes into work who's having a hard day or who's going through a divorce, the best line of defense for them is their company. If they
Right.
have that company that has trust. Now, granted, awareness of clinical resources is so important and having those system teams, especially after significant events, who are trained in however they have the conversations after are really important. But we have to keep the trust within the firehouse and within our
Mhm.
companies and within our community. I always can tell, good companies versus not because the ones that need more outside resources, they're not doing what they're supposed to be doing
Right.
to take care of each other.
There's a parallel to RIT. Um, we have the rapid intervention team outside, but the data shows that most people are rescued by the companies that are on the inside with them at that time. So same for mental health in the fire station. And I think that's one that we probably do right more than we get credit for because there is no documentation or record. But um, that is the proverbial brotherhood. I mean, I have seen people, help people repair cars, um, help them care for sick family members. Just that's still alive. It's still alive. But sometimes when you formalize something, it almost encourages you not to go that way, and we can't fall into that trap of just hitting the easy button. Oh well, I don't want to. I don't have to deal with that. I can call somebody in to respond. So yeah, I think that's a good RIT is a good metaphorical comparison to that.
Yeah, no,
Um,
I definitely like, when I talk about the organizational leadership, that's the big piece is when you take on the role to lead, it doesn't mean that it's all, strategic, tactical.
yeah,
Um, you're taking on the responsibility for the people, and number 1, you've got to care about them, and you have to let them know you care about them, period.
right. Yep. And you're going to be again metaphorically the bartender to listen, uh, so that they're in the office telling you what happened, and sometimes that's all they need is the ability to talk and get it off their chest. And then in a lot of places where also the officers sort of become parent figures in a way to a lot of the younger folks. They ask for advice,
Yes,
on life stuff. All right, part two is more of a we get into the how-to guide. Um, Increasing your ability to withstand more trauma. The thing is, we're not going to prevent the trauma. So how do we flip the switch and use the trauma to make us better?
that's right, and, I start, part 2 with that image of the stress bucket, because I think a lot of first responders can, they understand when you talk about your metaphorical stress bucket and how over the course of the career, the traumas, the calls, poor leadership, finances, stressors go into that bucket. And you hear a lot of people say the bucket eventually overflows, but rarely we talk about putting a spigot on the bucket. And that's the beauty of it. And that's the beauty of part 2 is every part of or every chapter in part 2 is just another piece that increases the flow of the spigot. So, it's not to say, "All right, do every single one of these." You have to. It's here all of these things will help you reduce stress, will help increase your heart rate variability, will help prevent you from having your bucket overflow and lead to PTSD, mental breakdown, suicide. Pick and choose what works for you, and I had so much fun writing part 2 because there were periods of time where I would go down rabbit holes of research. Like, there's a section in there on play, and I would have never thought that there's research on play that helps to understand, how you can increase your capacity and you can increase your mental health by incorporating play into your life. And I think I wrote in there, the relationship between play and work is just like the relationship between tension and compression. Combined, it makes everything stronger. So, what I learned when I was researching play was the more time you build into your life to actually engage in things that you enjoy, to do something to where you're not keeping track of time, you're not worried about others, you're not competing, you're actually just doing it for the sake of it. You're enjoying it. The more time that you create for those things, the more you'll actually be able to focus on work, and
Mhm.
I love that. So,
Yeah, we had the 4 days off at Thanksgiving, and, um, of course, that was college football rivalry weekend, and, I can say I was like, "You know what? I'm not doing anything on these 4 days." And then we had the 18-hour tailgate/football game, with the rivalry that was 8 overtimes, and as tired as I was the next day, it was just awesome to just be tired for the fact that you were up and having a good time for 18 hours. So, there's a lot of truth to that. Talk about humor, a little bit. I know you just did an article for us not too long ago on humor, but talk about how important that is.
Yeah, no, and I think that's it's such an important conversation for us to be having because, one of the things I've noticed and over the course of my career is I can be filling in at a firehouse for a day, and because I'm a female and there's this fear of offending me, the jokes kind of stop, and people are watching everything they say, and when you're in that environment, you could feel it. It's inauthentic. You're not really feeling like a part of the team. You almost feel like an inconvenience in the firehouse that day. And so, I've had conversations with people who say, man, I don't want to lose my livelihood over a mistake. So if I have a woman or a minority, I'm going to watch what I say and not joke as much. But the sad reality is the research has found how important humor is on, you know, reducing our levels of stress, increasing our bonding. And in the book, I share um, I just share, where humor was played historically. For example, during World War II, at the concentration camps and specifically the Death March, where they were having to like pile up the people that were killed. You know, they would joke and they would say, "Hey, at least they don't weigh a lot because there would be no way to get them up there if they weighed too much. And good thing they're starving us." Uh, but even in the worst of times, there's humor, and a lot of times when we're joking, like we run a really bad call and somebody makes a joke, we're like, "God, why am I so sick? What's wrong with me?" But it's really neat to understand that no, that's actually an inbuilt response that's healthy. It When you see something that is just senseless and it's hard to make sense of, like w- to make a joke out of it is actually a way to help us process it and to help us just get beyond it. So I loved researching and writing on humor and just trying to make sure that wherever I work and the people around, like, that we don't get rid of humor, because when you get rid of humor you're going to get rid of the relationships, and the
Right.
relationships are the strongest predictor of resilience and health and post-traumatic growth.
I used to get into a lot of trouble using humor in staff meetings. I needed this research uh, back then, but I don't know why I was doing it. Just to be funny or to actually subconsciously it might have been to lighten up the situation, you know. But I will say it only works inside the organization. It doesn't work too well outside the organization when you see something
Right.
horrific and crack a joke and everybody looks at you like you're some sick um, person, which we all are, but they don't get it too well. All right, and then the third part is basically a consultation guide for organizations. So talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, it's a guide for organizations, but also individuals who wanna help other people. So, with all of the work that I've done over the last several years on peer support, I'll have emails often asking, "Hey, we're wanting to start a peer support team. Where do we start?" And these conversations for me are extremely exhausting because there's a lot. So, what I decided to do was, and that's actually, I guess that was where the idea of the book came in the first place, was if I can put it all down in one place and just tell people to go buy it, that's what I want to do. So, what I did with part three was I literally took our 2-day peer support class and I broke it down into chapters. Like, we open our 2-day class with active listening and the value of active listening. So, I spent time talking about active listening, how to, and then went into a little bit about therapy, being the bridge, what other resources are available, and uh, and then there's a section in there on postvention. I know actually there's an article coming out on that soon, because a lot of people don't know what to do when they have a suicide. And a lot of times, if there is a suicide, a lot of organizations think that they're honoring the person and their family by not admitting to the true cause of death. But all that does is prolong suffering and pain. So there's a section on postvention, just basically how to. Henrico, about 4 years ago, lost a member to suicide, and they put out to me one of the most beautiful statements on that loss, because you can use postvention to honor the person who died, but also to educate and to increase, the awareness of, support and resources for mental health. So you can use it as an opportunity to help other people struggling. And they did that in that statement where they kind of honored the person who was lost, and then they encouraged others who are struggling to reach out, and to not suffer in silence and know that you're not alone. So just anything that I thought of that could help organizations be more culturally competent and emotionally literate, more literate in terms of mental health. I put in that last part. There's a section on safe communication. A lot of times when people talk about suicide, they think it's important to say, it's a crisis among firefighters. And they communicate about suicide in a way that makes people struggling with thoughts of suicide or with depression think that it's inevitable that they will die by suicide. And so it's really important when trying to, communicate about suicide that you actually deliver the message of hope. And instead of focusing on all the people that we lost, let's focus on the people that were struggling and found their way to healing. That's how you give others hope so that they too can find their way to healing. I had a friend from the Wilmington Fire Department write the section on facility dogs. I know a lot of organizations are doing a lot of work with therapy and service dogs. To me, Wilmington, North Carolina, they are doing an amazing job. It's not a service dog program, it's not a therapy dog program, it's a facility dog program, and each of the dogs are trained over $10,000 in training for these dogs. And these dogs can detect cortisol levels, they can detect stress, and they know, just who to go kind of spend a little time with. And Wilmington has explained that ever since they established their facility dog program, they've actually reduced the need for debriefings. Because a lot of times after a really bad call, the handler and the dog comes in, and somehow just the dog's presence creates an opportunity in house for people to talk, and they have that conversation, and they tend to do a lot better. So we've got that section. There's a part by Jeremy Hurd on chaplaincy in the 3rd part, but I really tried to, make it just super encompassing. I was really grateful for Scott Robinson, who he responded to the Station nightclub fire, in 2003, and he had never written about that. He'd never truly shared a lot about that response, but in bits and pieces. And he once did a keynote that was an hour long, and he explained from beginning to end. And I asked him if he could, write that because I thought it was so important. Because one of the things he talked about was he talked about the humor in there, how but a problem that the department had was the firefighter rehab place was at the same place the families were waiting. And they needed that humor because what they were doing, I mean, he was just pulling bodies, it was awful. They needed that humor to help them just get through the day, but the families are sitting there looking at them like they're disgusting. Um, he was sent home, and he talked about just how dangerous it is to send somebody home, after an event like this, especially when they don't have people at the home. So we have to be careful that we're not forcing people to go home after they run bad calls, because now you're taking away all of their natural coping mechanisms from them. And then a beautiful part of that story was he talked about being forced to sit into a debriefing, and he didn't know the people, just like you said earlier. He didn't trust them, and he was pissed off that he was forced to be there. So he basically just, got through it. He got nothing out of it. And then when he went back to the firehouse, another peer who's not trained at all in peer support, just empathetically was like, "Hey, man, how can I help you?" And that's what he needed, and that's what helped him was just one of his brothers who showed the empathy and just asked, "How can I help you?"
Mhm.
So I love that story. There's so many lessons in responding to traumatic events that we can get just from Scott's story there. So I'm so grateful that he was willing to share it.
So, what's your hope for what this book will do for individuals and organizations? You say the beauty of darkness is that it's not just our lives that we have the power to change.
Yeah, no, and that's the beauty, and that's why I've become so passionate and I've not like let up because one of the things that's always bothered me over the years, and one of the reasons why I wrote this book is there's a lot of misinformation that's consistently shared because the misinformation is clickbait, right? Uh, I wish my eyes could forget what they've seen or whatnot. Like there's a lot of clickbait over and over again that gets shared a million times. I think I remember seeing something online about first responders are exposed to 1,300 more traumas than people. And those are the things that we share like crazy and wildfire, but there's no solutions in that. All it is another message of doom and gloom, and that always frustrated me. So my hope was for all of the people like me who needed actual, true, tangible information that could help. The goal was to get that there, and so far the feedback has been incredible from people. One of my friends, she messaged me and she was like, "I'm only on chapter 3 and I'm already crying," and I'm like, "No, that's not the goal. I don't want you to cry." But I think for people who feel like they're alone, who feel like what's bothering them is, like I felt, is insignificant or silly, or makes no sense. I think it's helpful for them to be able to, see that they're not alone, but also to see that it doesn't have to define you. And most often than not, the hard days do give us the capacity to help others. I'm grateful, and I know we talked about the Ernest Hemingway quote a little bit before we went online. And his life was tragic, but that quote to me is just so powerful. Everything breaks, but some people and some things are stronger at the broken places, and I wholeheartedly believe that. We see that day in and day out. To me, some of the best people that I know, some of the people that I love the most, are the people who've gone through the most struggle because of their struggle, they have this ability to be kind and to be supportive that others who may not have struggled, are missing out on.
Hmm. For sure. I got that quote right here. It says, "The world breaks everyone, and afterward, many are strong at the broken places. But those that will not break, it kills. It kills the very good and the very gentle and the very brave impartially. If you're none of these, you can be sure it will kill you too. But there will be no special hurry." And yeah, he had an incredible um, bout of trauma, head injuries, multiple divorces, just alcoholism. And I think I told you earlier, you had thought he was a firefighter. Um, but the key phrase there, many are strong at the broken places. And I look at that like a piece of steel. And guy was trying to teach me how to weld one time, and I wasn't that good at it. But he's like, if you weld correctly, if a piece of steel breaks, if you weld it correctly, that weld is the strongest part of the steel. And it may break in a different place, but it's usually not going to break at the weld if you did it correctly. If you did it incorrectly, then it will. Another great example of, like, if you learn from trauma, if you grow from it, um, you know, we've had conversations about just stuff. And again, I'm not one that I always said I had a great support system for every situation that I faced, but I lost a best friend in high school to a car wreck. That actually led me to being a firefighter on the fire department. No clue, no ambition for that ahead of time, but knowing that there was nobody to respond in the area where the wreck was, that was one of the catalysts that you know, led to the career that I chose. So everybody's going to have the trauma, but it's making sure you have the support system around you to be able to weld it and be stronger in that spot, and then go on and make that a part of your fabric. I mean, it shapes everything you do from then on. And it's not going to be non-existent in anybody's life, no matter if they're a gazillionaire celebrity or the poorest kid on the block living next door to the fire station. They're all gonna face it. Um, so you say in the book, um, I cared more about what others thought of me than who I knew myself to be. I feared criticism, and I wanted to shrink myself to stay off the radar. I judged others based on what I was told and feared criticism. I wish I knew then what I know now. We can't escape criticism and won't please everyone. For some people, it's easier to criticize others than to address their flaws. What they don't like about themselves, they attack in others. Those confident in who they are spend their days bettering themselves and have little time to criticize others. When we minimize ourselves and fear the criticism of others, we let them win by failing to live our best lives. That's powerful. Powerful. And the higher you go up in an organization, the more criticism you're going to get, and and you can't ignore it totally because it's there. But how do you cope with it now that you understand it a little bit when you hear something? And you can't say it doesn't bother you,
Oh, it does, yeah.
but you process it differently. So how do you deal with that?
Well, a phrase that I always keep in the back of my mind is, "I've never met a hater doing better than me." Right? So,
Right.
but no, I mean, I was that person in the academy, you were constantly told that, your reputation is gonna follow your whole career, so don't slip, don't get off on the wrong foot, and so you're constantly worried about that reputation, and it affects so many things. For example, we were talking about, harassment and civility and how we often respond to that, and it's true. No matter how brave we think we are and how courageous we think we are and the heroes we are as first responders, I've never been in an organization or around an organization where somebody was kind of, identified as being the outcast, and every other person responded by staying away from that person, because nobody wanted to catch what they had. Uh, so I think group think is real. Our desire to fit in is so overwhelming, and in the fire service, that can be so damaging because it can lead to so much inauthenticity.
I'm not even
I
going to
wrote a
try.
book, but I can't say big words. Um, and when you think back to the root of trauma and struggle, it's all masking, right? We
Right.
all have insecurities. We all make mistakes. We all fail. And when we feel like we can't show any of that stuff, we end up, behind closed doors doing things that cause more damage. There's a lot of conversations on, how firefighters use, more substances than others and are riskier and, have higher rates of suicide. Well, all of these things that we do are things that hide from addressing true sources of pain and struggle. Life is hard. We're going to struggle. We're going to make mistakes. And the beauty of that is just how being authentic can help others. And, I'm telling you, you do have no idea how your keynote just influenced so much of my work and what I do today. I never thought like that I would be somebody that ever spoke on leadership. There were enough leadership people out there speaking, but that organizational leadership really transitioned to conversations on leadership. The book, The Culture Code, and then the other
Mhm.
book, Legacy, they both had huge influences on me. And a big piece of it is the value of leaders modeling vulnerability. Uh,
Mm.
Dan Shaw,
Huge.
teaches about, like in an AAR, how valuable that is to model a little bit of vulnerability and help create mental models to grow. So he talks about the four most important words a leader can say are, I screw that up, and start the AAR with the IC, what you wish that you could have done better, what you didn't see, and then move on from there. And because I know I've been at a lot of tailboard critiques where we all stand around and we're like, fire went out, everybody's going home, great job, pats on the backs. But we all know that every single one of us made some sort of mistake. And if we can
Right.
share that mistake, others can learn from it and not make the same mistake.
And it's important to know, not just point out the mistake, but understand the context of what was the information you had at the time that you made that decision. And sometimes you find out when you first saw it, you were like, why in the world did they do that? But then when you find out what they were faced with, what they saw, what they knew and what they didn't know, then you're like, oh, I would have done the same thing. So you put yourself in there. So yeah, I've been to a bunch of bad ones, bunch of bad after action reviews that was just all about who did what wrong. But I've been to some great ones also, and they also have to be immediate, because if you go back to the station and you wait till the next shift, everybody has processed and justified all of their actions, and it's a different call when you get there 48, 72 hours later. It's not reality anymore. So that's cool. Well, it's a great book. Thank you for the labor of love, and um, I know a couple of years of putting that together, and then multiple edits and back and forth, but it was worth the wait, wasn't it?
It was. It's exciting. I love that it's
And
out.
then it's out there now. You can find it on Fire Engineering Books. and look for Dena doing some great work with Mr. Lieb up there now at the helm of the foundation. Tell us just a little bit as we close out about what you're doing with that role.
Oh, yeah, no, thank you, for the opportunity to talk about that. So, I work for Chief Lieb with the First Responder Center for Excellence. They are an affiliate of the National Fallen Firefighters Foundation, and basically the way Chief Lieb says it is the goal is to make sure, that the families of firefighters never meet the Fallen Firefighters Foundation through the work that the First Responder Center for Excellence does. So, our work is a lot of upstream. My specific role is with behavioral health. However, we have a program manager of cancer, program manager of nutrition and fitness. So we're looking at all of the things. Chief Lead calls them the firefighters' blind spots. All of our blind spots and just ways to create better information, provide free training, help with resource guides for individuals and agencies to just help move upstream. So it's absolutely incredible getting to work for somebody of that caliber. And then the mission is just absolutely amazing. We just finished creating some whiteboard videos and creating some modules that will get out there. So it's been a ton
That's
of fun.
awesome.
Yeah.
Well, fire service thanks you for all your work in that area and for putting this book together. And again, everybody is Hope Out of Darkness by Dena Ali. You can get it at fireengineeringbooks.com. Thank you for joining us today. I'm David Rhodes for Fire Engineering Books, and this one is in the books.